What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 606. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, do you ever regret moving to Denver? Would you rather be in California?
No. I mean, there's a lot I love about California, and like I'm always going to be someone from California, but I really do like Denver. I think there's a lot of awesome stuff here, and there's a lot of awesome folks here. So I've been pretty happy. Well,
you brought them all with you.
Right. That's why they're here. Yeah,
you moved, and all of a sudden everybody from California that you knew moved with you as well. Coincidence? I think not. Yeah, Denver's a cool place. I'll have to come out and visit sometime again when we can actually do so. Luis, before we get into the show, there was something that we wanted to mention that we got a chance to do a little while back now before the set reviews. That was really kind of special, right? For us to get a chance to do something like this. And we got to take part in a Make-A-Wish request, I guess is what you'd call it.
Yeah, we ended up, getting connected with this guy, Noah, who awesome kid. And he had his brother and some of his friends where we did a Magic Online Cube draft against them, or not, all together. It wasn't us against them, but we ended up getting to do that. I think we both recorded our sides and kind of sent them the video so they could also see what our thoughts were during the draft. It was using their cube that they'd worked a ton on, and had a lot of cool, interesting, unique stuff going. So it was a blast.
Yeah, it was really cool to get a chance to meet Noah and hang out with him and his brother and his friends. And also, one of the really cool things that happened alongside it was Wizards of the Coast really stepped up. The request went through Wizards of the Coast, and they set it up so that we could play Noah's Cube on Magic Online, which, come on, that had to take some coding and some moving around of parts and stuff to be able to set it up, because we weren't able to be in the same room. Normally that we would have been able to travel to where Noah is. He actually lives in Canada, and we would have been able to go up there and do a draft. But of course, given the circumstances, that isn't possible. And so they really stepped it up too. So I thought that was really great of them, to accommodate something like that. And it was really, really cool and a special thing. So we wanted to give a big shout out to Noah from everybody here at LR and say what's up and GG's to him. Even though you kind of smashed him, Luis. It was...
I had a pretty good deck.
Yeah, my deck was sweet. His cube was actually really dope. Like, it had a bunch of cards that are cube worthy, but maybe not quite as good as like a comparable card, but that are just different, And so like it really kind of opened it up. I was actually a huge fan of drafting the cube, especially because I won so much,
All I'm saying is we never got to play to determine who was the final boss. But
yeah, that's true. Well, we'll have to do that someday. Okay, let's get into the show. So this week, we are going to do the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms format breakdown. Now, the reason that we're saying format breakdown and not initial impressions is that the way that the news cycle, if you will, works for Magic these days means that I'm 30 drafts deep into this format, right? First impressions, I had those 2 weeks ago. And so the name just doesn't seem to fit with the speed at which the formats turn over these days. So we're going to go for format breakdown. This isn't necessarily the end all be all. As you know, the format will continue to evolve as we play it and as people's preferences change and things like that. New things are discovered. But, I don't know. Coming in here, I feel like I have a pretty darn good hold on the format already, and we're ready to share that with you. So it's going to be the format breakdown for this show after the set reviews going forward, and we're going to do that one today. Before we get into it, got to mention our sponsor, channelfireball.com. That's right. Place to go for really everything that you could need. I mean, the funny part is that Channel Fireball just continues to grow, right? It used to just be like, oh, you could go there to get singles or maybe some sealed product. And then, there was apparel and supplies. Okay, cool. Then other games kind of got into the fold. Then we had the expansion of the content, right? And then there's Team CFB. And then there's what is it called? The cracking the boxes,
box breaks.
Box breaks, right? It's always something new going on over at Channel Fireball. And you can head over there to check it out, really, for anything that you may need Magic related. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. And it doesn't even have to be Magic related. Like, there's Flesh and Blood and Pokemon over there now, well represented. I know, of course, we're speaking to a primarily Magic audience, but if your interests bleed over into those other games, you'll find content and products and stuff there for those games as well. And of course, you know, the thing to go do right now is to get Forgotten Realms, right? I mean, you can pick up, you know, whatever you happen to need over there for singles and stuff like that. Now it's off of pre-order and you can actually get it shipped out to you. So make sure you head over to Channel Fireball for all of your Magic needs. And if you do end up picking up something over there, if you'd use the affiliate code LR, it's just a little box at checkout. I really appreciate it. It lets them know that we sent you over and it helps out the show. And we thank you for doing so. This show is, of course, also brought to you by you via the Patreon. And I mean, this is the lifeblood of our show. It's the reason that the show still exists and that it's able to continue forward. And we really want to say thank you to everybody who supports us on Patreon. If you're interested in that, you get some cool stuff. You get a thank you card in the mail and a sticker. And that's at any level. We wanted to make sure that you got something cool. It's a funny card that our friend Inquilutor, we commissioned him to make years ago when we first started it. And it features some of your favorite LR characters on it. And you can get one of those, again, at any level. And as you kind of go up, you can get access to some cool stuff as well. But the cool thing is the transparency on Patreon. Basically, everything's up front. You know exactly what you're getting. You're never locked into anything. And that's one of the reasons that we went with them. It's patreon.com/limited resources if you'd like to check that out. And we appreciate you doing so. Now, one of the cool things you get as well, of the many things, and this is again for any level of patron, is you get access to the Patreon feed, which is where we put things like when we want to communicate directly with our most dedicated listeners about like questions for the show, Patreon question of the week, which is what we're going to do now, or the Q&A episodes, or when we have guests on, you get access to that and you can throw your question into the ring. This one comes from Tabletop Tycoon, who says, do you think there's an opportunity for high profile limited tournaments with big prizes sponsored by someone other than Wizards in the new world of competitive Magic? Could it be sponsored by one of the big Magic marketplaces like TCG Player, Channel Fireball, etc., or a Magic dealer like SCG Events or something like that? Given the popularity of limited arena opens, I wonder if limited events could generate enough interest to be sustainable if not subsidized by Wizards. And this is a really good question from Tabletop Tycoon because it shows that they have an understanding of how these systems work with regards to like GPs or independent tournament circuits, and the fact that, you may not realize it, but these are subsidized by Wizards, meaning that they're either throwing in some of the money to make it work or, giving product or giving discounts or whatever to make these things work. Because the sad fact is that I don't think you could just make it profitable as a standalone. What's your take on that, Luis?
I mean, the short answer is no, not worth it to do these.
Okay.
The longer answer is when the main thing that a big Magic tournament sells is Magic. That's why Wizards runs these tournaments, right? They think
the game itself, you mean, not boosters or something like that. You mean like the big picture Magic the Gathering. Okay.
Right. And that is why Wizards runs these tournaments, right? They don't run these tournaments out of the goodness of their heart. They run these tournaments because they think those tournaments are profitable for them to run. The tricky part is it's always hard to figure out exactly how much benefit like marketing has, right? Because it's somewhat opaque. But I think that when you remove the component of like, hey, we intrinsically get value when people are just playing Magic and getting value from the people talking about Magic and just getting interested in the game. That's so much of what these tournaments provide that I think that a third party is just not going to have that much incentive to invest a lot of money in these tournaments. Like, I wish that weren't the case, but I can't really think, besides the Star City Tour, I can't really think of a hugely successful third party event series. Like, right. Channel Fireball's run some big tournaments. They've been okay. But we haven't done like a full series. There have been some, the MKM series in Europe. I have less visibility into that. I know people did like those, but at the core of it, like those also, the way that Star City makes those tournaments viable is because they're there buying and selling cards. Yeah. You know what you do a lot more of? Buying and selling cards at constructed tournaments as opposed to limited. So you're adding like an additional hurdle on top of something that's already a pretty tough value proposition in my opinion. So as much as I would like the answer to be different, I don't see the dream of like a, 25K team trios limited or, a 50K draft tournament. I don't really understand I don't see a world where that is what happens. And yeah, as much as I would like to have that be the case.
Yeah, people consistently underestimate how much it costs to run like a Grand Prix, for example. People, why don't they just, you hear that all the time. Whenever I hear that sentence,
you remember when coverage Wizards didn't do coverage for the first time at some of these Grand Prix, right? They went from always having coverage to sometimes not having coverage.
Yeah.
And I remember just like the people, why don't they just do coverage? What does it cost? $2,000 for the weekend?
Yeah.
Like, you could run coverage for $5,000 easy. And it's like, you realize like internet at the convention center costs you $7,000.
Right.
Like that's like the floor. So
to have the internet brought to your computer costs $7,000 to $10,000, depending on where you're at. Like, GPs cost, and then, of course the non-obvious expenses, right? Like, for example, okay, we're going to pay some commentators to come in. Great. Well, we have to fly them in and we have to put them up. Like, people aren't going to, fly in on their own dime to do this consistently. Maybe as a one-off, they'll be like, yeah, I'll try it. But, it's not sustainable. Right. And that's just a comment. Then you need the 4 or 5 people behind the scenes that nobody ever sees. Right. Like, right now we have Jeff working as our video producer on this podcast. You don't see him, but he's an integral part of what we do here. And he's done that, by the way, at the GP level. And there's 3 or 4 of him often at those things that are just keeping things running. You got to pay those people too, and you got to fly them out too. It really does add up. And we're only talking about coverage right now, which is, I have the, a good insight into that. But I mean, staff, judges, security, insurance, the floor itself. I mean, it adds up really, really, really fast. And it ends up being that if you can't justify it as a strong marketing expense, then it doesn't really end up being a thing. I would wonder if a smaller thing could work.
So what I do think could work is imagine a high stakes draft tournament with like a really outrageous entry fee. Like,
yes.
Are there enough people to run a 32-person draft tournament with $1,000 entry fee? Right. I think so.
I think so too.
We know a lot of lapsed degenerate Magic players who would love to play in this.
Right. And now they're all like middle-aged, they have jobs or they've, been able to accumulate a little bit of money where they can throw around money like that, So anyway, I am interested in this, especially in the smaller scale limited realm. I've been kicking around ideas for stuff like this for an LR branded version of this, but it is very tough to make it work financially if you scale it up at all. So there you go.
We both love for this to happen. Don't take this as we don't want this to happen.
God,
we just are unfortunately realistic about about the prospects of it,
Yeah, and I think the takeaway here is interesting. It actually goes back to the original sentence here from Tabletop Tycoon, which is with the popularity of the arena opens. I would just say, thank God we have the arena opens, because they actually open up the door for having this level of tournament where you can win some actual money at it and that it's limited. Because if you take those away, as we've described, you're not really getting them back in IRL. So, basically they just wouldn't exist otherwise. So there you go. Okay, Luis, let's do a couple of crack-a-packs. I always like to kick off the format. What is it called? Format breakdown.
The format breakdown.
Yeah. Shows with a crack-a-pack or two, because that way it shows kind of how we're approaching the format and lets us talk about a lot of the cards. So we'll jump in here. Our first card out. And by the way, before we get into everything, really nice to have a refresher, like a palette cleansing type of set here. Like there's not like the only weird thing are the dungeons, but there's not like, okay, well, our special alternate art foil Japanese, whatever card for this one is, it's just like our first card is Dawnbringer Cleric. Like it's a card in the set and you can take it or you can not. I kind of like it. And by the way, it's Dawnbringer Cleric. So 1 and a white, 1/3. When it ETBs, you can gain 2 life, destroy an enchantment, or exile a card from a graveyard. Fine. You can play it in the Lifegame deck, and sometimes the enchantment thing matters, but clearly not a first pick. Brazen Dwarf, 1 and a red, 1/3. Whenever you roll a die, it does a damage to an opponent. This has been a complete flop. I think this card is just unplayable on every level. That deck doesn't, even if you have it in that deck, it doesn't perform.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get to it more in our main topic, but I think the short answer as we go through this pack is synergy stuff is not nearly as important as it would be in other sets. Like there's some sets where it's all about synergy. Like you would never put 4-mana 3/3 flyer into your deck unless it like really meshed with what your game plan was, and these cards would get like correspondingly lower ratings as a result. When it comes to Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, like power is more important than synergy. So when I see something like Brazen Dwarf, it's like, yep, this card just doesn't quite do the trick. It's not where you need it to be.
That's right. Next is Direwolf Prowler. That's the 2 and a green 2/2, and you can pay 1 and a green to give it +2/+2 and haste until end of turn, but you can only do it once a turn. This is a playable common, but I have actually gone down on it a bit. There's better ways to approach green that don't involve this, but if it ends up in your deck, it's fine. It's like a C-.
Yeah, I agree. Next up, we've got Elterguard Approach. This is one of the split cards for a blue that either taps a creature or gives a creature hexproof, and I found this card to be basically unplayable.
It's trash,
I would consider it and then probably not side it in against someone with removal, but we're not going to take it.
I think I faced the ultimate test. I had 2 Mind Flayer. That's the 3 blue 3/3 that mind controls a creature when it enters the battlefield. Right. And I'm like, okay, am I going to put Elterguard Approach in this deck? And I chose against it. It was closer, right? I mean, that's the type of thing that's actually worth protecting and costs enough so that you can set that up. But I still said no. So if it's not like a slam dunk in that situation, then it's just not a thing. Baleful Beholder is next. 4 black for a 6/5. When it ETBs, you can give all your creatures Menace, or you can make your opponent sacrifice an enchantment.
This card is fine to put in your deck if you need a card that costs 6 mana. You would basically never pick this card when there's more than 3 cards or 4 cards in the pack, because you will always have one and you will rarely play it. It's obviously fine. Any card in this form, like in this day and age that costs 6 mana, is going to kind of do something for you. When I've cast Baleful Beholder, I felt like reasonable about it, but you're just never looking for this card. So not something I'm going to take here.
Yep. Totally serviceable. Not in demand. Charm Sleep is next. 1 blue for an enchantment that enchants a creature. The creature gets tapped and doesn't untap on its controller's untap step.
It's a fine card, but this takes a big hit because of how weak blue is in the set.
Really
and
weak.
Because of how much the set's about curving out, and Charm Sleep at double blue, it's really rough to have this when you've drawn Island double mountain and you can't cast it. So a card that you really want to cast on curve and it has a double blue cost is rough. And then, especially when that's the weakest color, but then you also have kind of the issue that there's a fair amount of random enchantment removal in the set. Like, Dawnbringer Cleric's going to get played by anyone who cares about life gain. Some of the green venture decks with like Wandering Troubadours will play that you find a cursed idol, that sort of thing. Getting splash damage, plus it's in the weakest color, plus it's a double blue card. I've gone really low on Charm Sleep. I would take. I guess I would. It's probably my pick so far because we've had a murder of terrible commons. But once we scan the rest of the pack, I would be surprised this cracks the top 4. Yeah,
it's funny. It's like I feel like I'm breaking up with it. Like it's not you, it's the format. This card's been good.
This card's totally fine in some formats.
Yeah. Next is Dwarfhold Champion. That's the 1 and a white 3/1, and as long as it's equipped, it gets +0/+2. You can put it in your deck.
Yeah, definitely fine.
Sure.
You really want a 2-drop in this format, and this is a card I would put in my deck if you need a 2-drop, regardless of your equipment status, and then index with a good amount of equipment. Of course, it can overperform.
Null Hunter is next. 1 and a green 2/2, and when it attacks with Pack Tactics, it gets +1/+1 counter. It's been good. This is a 2-drop that you're happy to put in your deck.
Yeah, I'm curious your take on this once you get to Marshall's patented red-green ramp strategy, but we'll get to that later. My pick right now in this pack is probably Dwarfhold Champion for what it's worth. I think it edges out Null Hunter for me, but they're both pretty close. I would take either.
Yeah, I would take Null Hunter or Charm Sleep over the Champion, but I would definitely take Null Hunter over Champion. But I'm higher on green, I think, than you are as well. Jaded Sellsword is next. It's 3 and a red for the 4/3. And if you pay a treasure to cast it, it gets haste and first strike until end of turn. And has like the sickest artwork. He just does not give,
Oh, yeah.
He's 0 Fs to give. But I'm a big fan of the artwork and not as big a fan of the card.
It's just complete filler. It's straight up C- territory where you don't feel actively bad if it's in your deck, but you're never excited and you're never like, man, this deck just needs one more Jaded Sellsword.
Yeah, I want to put your face on that card today. That'll cost you extra. How many times have I heard that? Delver's Torch is next. 1 and a white for an equipment. A creature gets +1/+1, and when it attacks, you venture into the dungeon. The equip cost is steep, though. It's 3. Where are you at on this? I don't know.
I basically only play this card in my heavy venture decks, especially ones that have some good evasive creatures. And it is fine in those decks. Like, it does the thing it promises. But there's a lot of good equipment in this set. And, like, how often should you play this in red-white equipment? My guess is pretty rarely.
Yeah, it really depends on how many Bruinors you have access to, where you just want to have anything laying around. But generally, it's on the lower end of the equipment scale. Uncommons, Lightfoot Rogue. 1 and a black, 2/1, and when it attacks, you roll a d20. On a 1 through 9, it gets Death Touch. On a 10 through 19, it gets +1/+0 in Death Touch. And on a 20, it gets +3/+0 and First Strike in Death Touch.
Totally
it's been
great.
Whatever.
I think it's any 2-drop is good in this format, especially ones that have relevance later. And this can always attack. Not the best blocker.
It's just you really want a Death Touch blocker some of the time, and it just never does that. Yeah, it's fine. I mean,
outside of aggressive decks, it gets a lot worse. But
yeah,
I'm taking Lightfoot Rogue out of this pack right now. I also think black is excellent. So getting to take a black card first is intrinsically good, and this is the best card in the pack.
It is the best card in the pack, so that doesn't say a lot about the pack. Yeah, you find some prisoners is next, and apparently we're not finding any good cards. This is the 1 in a red instant. Destroy an artifact, or you can exile the top 3 cards of target opponent's library. Choose one of them until the end of your next turn. You can play that card, and you can spend mana in any color to cast it.
It's a playable card if you
okay.
need
I haven't played it yet. I don't know. Maybe other people take it higher than I do. I can see it being okay, but I have a hard time being like, that's a card I really want.
It's like we said in the start review. It's Shatter, Strategic Planning, Split card, and I never have a deck that really needs these things, so it's not like I take it highly. But you're not going to be disappointed if you put it in your deck. Yeah.
Check for Traps is 1 in a black sorcery, and it is the opponent reveals their hand, and you exile a non-land card from it. If it's an instant or a card with flash, they lose a life. Otherwise, you do.
A good card. I mean,
put in your deck.
You can put this counts as a 2-drop where if you play this on turn 2, you can usually make it so they don't have a card to play on their next turn. So even though it doesn't affect the board, it's still, if your curve is turn 2 this, turn 3 creature, you're going to be in, I think, comparable position than if you played turn 2 creature, turn 3 creature.
Yeah. Well, they made it easy on us, Luis. Our rare is Westgate Regent, the 3 black 4/4 flyer with ward, discard a card, and whenever it hits the opponent, you put that many +1/+1 counters on it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to my upcoming stay at the Westgate Regent next time we do coverage, because this thing, despite sounding like a mid-range hotel, is really a top-of-the-line finisher.
It's really actually a house. Yeah, no, this card's incredible. Really, one of the more powerful cards. We gave it an A. And, you can't not 2 for 1, basically. I mean, they have to block and have a combat trick or have a Death Touch flyer or something weird like that. You're going to be down a card to the board no matter what. And that's if you happen to have an answer for a fairly beefy flyer. And it doubles. I mean, if it hits you, it's an 8/8. If it hits you again, it's a 16/16. Like, it's such a fast clock. One of the faster ones in the game, or in the set, I should say. So, yeah, Westgate Regent is the very obvious slam dunk here from this pack. So let's open up another one.
Yeah.
Because that was too easy. Okay. First common out of our next pack is Eyes of the Beholder, which is the 4 black instant, gives a creature -11/-11 until end of turn. This is firmly in tier 2 removal territory. You can put it. I played one in a deck, and it was like, okay, well, I had access to kind of a kill-all spell in the late game, but it's very difficult to get ahead on mana on it, and it's a similar card in that it's not really a priority. Like, I would never take it first, for example.
Yeah, it is actually very similar to the Beholder itself that costs 6, where if this is in your deck, it's going to do the thing that you expect it to do. That's just not a very exciting thing if you need to spend 6 mana on something. Also, again, if you want to side this in or play it in sealed, totally good, because you're probably going to face one of the Mythic Dragons, more often than not.
Yeah, so there you go. Next is Arcane Investigator. 1 in a blue, 2/1 with Search the Room. You pay 5 in a blue and you roll a d20. If you get a 1 through 9, you draw a card. If you get a 10 through 20, you look at the top 3 cards of your library and put one of them in your hand and the rest on the bottom in any order. Man, Louis, it's a sad day when I look at this card and I don't even see it in the pack. I mean, it is just not on my radar. I think in all the matches I've played, I think I've had somebody roll a D20 on this like once ever. And I felt like, oh, well, then I win, like it just, and it's sad because I normally like cards like this that are like, hey, they come down, maybe they trade off for something early and then, they can be a mana sink. As is now tradition, I do not find myself needing mana sinks in the set. I've had plenty to do with my mana, and Arcane Investigator has just been a flop.
Yeah, I have not found this card to be impressive. Like we kind of thought going in, you just don't have time to do this.
No,
so
you just don't. And we knew that. I'm a little sad about it, but
but this is part of what contributes to blue being weak in the set. Their 2-drop is a little weaker on stats, but has a good late game ability. The set's not about that, so I'll take the slightly better stats that the other colors have on their 2-drops, and that's going to lead to a more of an advantage.
Yeah, exactly. Next card is just so low impact. It doesn't do anything. It's Silver Raven. This is the blue 1/1 flyer. When it ETBs, you scry one. It happens to be an artifact creature. I don't know if that's hearkening to something down the line or just, trying to do some artifact sub-theme that kind of missed, but this card's just been a complete blank.
Yeah, it's not something that really has a place here.
Right. You come to the Null camp as 1 in a red instant. You choose 1 up to 2 target creatures can't block this turn, or target creature gets +3/+1 until end of the turn. I read this card and I say this should be good in an aggro deck, but people don't seem to play it, and I never take it.
Yeah, I've lost to this card, but I haven't really considered putting it in my deck.
Yeah, so it's just too low. Next card, now we got a premium common. Dragon's Fire. 1 in a red instant. It's so funny. I was talking to my friend Jay about this, and he's like, they put all this text on it, right? That like is kind of hard to figure out, and like you can reveal a dragon or point to a dragon on the battlefield or whatever. But really what it does is it does 3 damage to target creature, planeswalker, and occasionally a little bit more. But you had me at 3 mana or 2 mana instant that does 3 damage. So I'm in for that already.
I've seen the Dragon Claws be good, by the way.
I have,
and
too.
That's already
I've done 4 and 5. I have.
That you'll always already be very happy about. So Dragon's Fire, easy pick so far. And in the running for the best common, I think it probably is the best common. I think Grim Bounty is quite strong, too. And Price of Loyalty is a multicolored common, so it's a little further behind in that sense. But yeah, all these cards are great. Part of the reason black and red are good is we're discussing the best commons. And we're talking about a red card, a black card, and maybe a black-red card. So.
Right. Yeah, and these are some of the best ones in the set. But I do view Dragon's Fire and the removal as a different category because they just don't need help. Like, you just put them in the deck, right?
Yeah.
If you're playing those colors. Shambling Gas is next. It's black for a 1/1. And when it dies, you can give a creature -1/-1 until end of turn, or you can make a treasure. Card's okay, actually.
Oh, I like the card.
Yeah.
This goes toe-to-toe with basically every 2-drop in the set in terms of it acts as a 2/2, right? Because it gives -1/-1. So the fact that you can play this on turn 1, and then even if you don't have anything to play on turn 2 is great. And you can like sneak it in later. The fact that it makes treasure gives it some flexibility. Like sometimes you trade or even chump with this and then just turn 4 play an owlbear or something. So I think Shambling Gas is great. It's no Dragon's Fire, but it's good.
Yeah. Next is Elterguard Ranger. This is the 4 and a green 4/1 with reach, and it also makes a 2/2. I like this card. I play this card quite a bit. It doesn't quite reach above, kind of not filler, but run-of-the-mill 5-drop status, but it is on the top end of that range.
I have a lower value of it because there are other good 5-drops. Like this and Owlbear are so good, right? They're both comparable, which then makes the value of either of those go down because you don't pick up one of these, you might pick up an Owlbear. And I can't speak for you, I guess. You don't really want 6 5-drops in your deck.
Oh, yeah, you can't speak for me.
Yeah. So like if the Dragon's Fire weren't here, I would take Shambling Gas over Elterguard Ranger, but I do think that the Ranger is good. Yeah,
see, that's really close for me too, because again, the Ranger is more replaceable than a card like the Gas. So I'm not really sure. I'd probably take the Ranger, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was wrong.
Interesting. You're not just looking at what's the best card. You're also looking at, hey, I have more access to this kind of effect. So this kind of, the Shambling Gas is worth more. Even if Elterguard Ranger is like a better card, the fact that you can pick up that or Owlbear or Hill Giant Herd Gorger and feel pretty good about your top end means that, yeah, you should take the cheaper card. So
that's right.
That's obviously part of why we do this. If it was always take the better card, we would not have been stuck to this, and
probably wouldn't have a podcast anymore.
Obsessed with draft for so long.
You see a guard approach. We talked about that. Planar ally, 3 white for a 3/3 flying angel, and when it attacks, you venture into the dungeon. I've liked it. This is a card that is really annoying. It's a good 5-drop. Your opponent kind of needs to do something about it, or it generates enough value. It's been good.
Yeah, it's solid.
Yeah,
same deal as Elterguard Ranger, but even more so. Where my white decks don't even always need 5-drops. So I'm not going to take Planar Ally with any sort of eye to early in the draft, because you just don't need it. But it is obviously fine once you get it.
Yeah. I have it probably in the 6th, 7th, 8th pick on average, somewhere in that range. But I think the comparison to the Ranger is perfect. They really feel similar. Celestial Unicorn. Here's an interesting one. So this is the 2 and a white 3/2, but whenever you gain life, you put a counter on it. I mean, when you're talking about commons, if you're going to play green, white life gain, this Celestial Unicorn ends up becoming a really important part of the equation for you.
I think that Celestial Unicorn is an important card for that green-white deck. And the green-white deck is one of the few synergy decks where you really need to make sure your thing is going. So I would not take Unicorn over Dragon's Fire or, in the premium removal, but I think it's completely legitimate to take it over Planar Ally, Shambling Gas, Elterguard Ranger, all those things. This leads to your really good draws.
Yeah, because, we were talking about how this set isn't as synergy focused as some of the ones recently. But that doesn't mean that there aren't some decks that are. And the green-white deck is. And the Celestial Unicorn is kind of the common that you build the whole thing around. So there you go. Uncommons. Rust Monster. This is the 2 and a red, 2/1 first strike, and you can sack an artifact to give it +2/+0 until end of turn. You could put it in your deck, I guess.
I like it in red-black. In red-black, I found it to be really good.
It's got a lot of food.
It gets a bunch of treasures. With one treasure in play, Rust Monster basically dominates combat, right? There's not that many situations where a 4/1 first strike's not good enough to get the job done. And then even in red-white, look, sometimes you just eat an equipment plus Dueling Rapier with this is really nice because you just play it and put it on the thing, and now it's a 4/1 first strike. So
then you can sacrifice it to make it a 4/1 for. Oh, never mind.
Well, I like Rust Monster more than any of the non-Dragonfire cards here, but of course you're going to take Dragonfire over Rust Monster.
Yep, agreed. Eccentric Apprentices Nexus is a 2 and a blue 2/2 flyer. When it ETBs, you venture into the dungeon, and then at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you've completed a dungeon, you can turn a creature into a 1/1 flying bird until end of turn.
Power level alone, this card's solid, especially since blue-white venture does work out. Clearly worse than Dragon's Fire, and I really wouldn't even blame you for taking Rust Monster over Apprentice, just because you just shouldn't start with a blue card. I actually have come to the conclusion now, after playing more, that the color imbalance is big enough to actually detract from my experience with the format.
Oh, really? You're at that point? Okay, interesting. Yeah, I feel like I'm still sorting that out, but hadn't come to that conclusion yet.
So the low water mark of color balance was green in Battle for Zendikar, right? Mm-hmm. Where you had the best players at the time, the best drafters at the time, basically saying you should take a decent non-green common over even the good green rares and uncommons, because being in green was such a huge mistake. Mm-hmm. We're not there. If there was a Mind Flayer in this pack, I would take it over Dragon's Fire. I don't think that you're supposed to go that far out of it, but I kind of see the modifier as about 1.5 on the scale, where if Rust Monster is a 6 and Eccentric Apprentice is a 7, I would still just take Rust Monster.
I see.
And I think that's that's comparable to where they are. Dragon's Fire is of course an 8, so there's no real decision there anyway. But the blue tax is real, and I think that should inform your early picks.
Dragon's Disciple is our next uncommon. It's the 1 and a white 1/3, and it has a bunch of dragon related text, and it's unplayable. And our rare is Gelatinous Cube. All right. 2 black for the ooze. It's a 4/3, and it has Engulf. When it ETBs, you exile a non-ooze creature an opponent controls until the cube leaves the battlefield. And the cool part is that you can dissolve it within the cube by paying X and black to put target creature card with mana value X exiled with the cube into its owner's graveyard. They could have named that Flush as well.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, Gelatinous Cube's the pick here. It's just the highest upside card by so much. It just, most of the time, eats a creature and then, for good, because they have about a 1-turn window, or if you determine you don't even need to do that, like if you're playing the blue-green or something, that's a little less likely to be able to get it off the board to get their thing back. But even as just a tempo play of play this, kill your 4-drop, attack you, and then next turn maybe they tap out to kill the cube, like you still got an advantage. And of course, if you get to dissolve it or you eat a token or something, like it's just nuts. So yeah, Gelatinous Cube, I think, for both of us.
Oh yeah, give me that Jello Cube.
Gelatinous Cubes take Gelatinous Cube.
We're Gelatinous Cubers. But okay, so let's get to the format breakdown here. Some of the big picture stuff. How fast is the format?
The format's very fast.
Yeah.
This is, I think the scale that I've been happy with is original Zendikar to Rise of the Eldrazi as the 2 poles, where original Zendikar is, I think, the fastest format we've ever had. Mm-hmm. And Rise is probably the overall slowest.
M14 is the other.
Right. M14 might be the other one. And, recently, like, we have a bunch of sets that fall near the middle, but overall, as the card quality's gotten higher, I feel like most sets you have to play to the board early. Like that's just kind of becoming, what Magic is about. They just are making such high quality creatures. With older sets, like really old sets where all the spells were nuts and the creatures were mostly bad, you could just get away with this murder because your opponent, their average creature is a 4-mana 2/3. That means you really don't have to be in a hurry to get something going. And, their average spell is like Agonizing Demise or Factor Fiction or Terminate, right?
Yeah.
Like that's just a different world. We're in a world now where 2-mana 3/1 is like below average that you expect an additional ability on it. And that used to be like, oh, pretty good stats. 4-mana 4/3, you're like, okay, so what are the abilities? Because, of course, you're not just playing a 4-mana 4/3. So, yes, formats are faster now. This format in particular, I put it at about a 3 on the 1 to 10 scale, with 1 is the fastest, where if you don't have early plays, you're going to get just trounced. Like, if you're on the draw and don't have a 2-drop, I feel like you're heavily unfavored against most decks in the format.
You're feeling the pressure for sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Another way to... another little bellwether that you'll feel on these is life gain. Like, how much does it matter? There's some formats where it's like, yeah, whatever. Here, it actually matters, and that's because you can fall behind. You really can.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And this doesn't mean that you always have to be in the business of killing them. Like, you don't have to be drafting aggro, but you have to be putting something onto the board. If it's a Shambling Gas to block with, great. That works too, but it needs to be something, or a bunch of removal spells like, yeah, I've got 2 Dragon's Fires, and 3 Precipitous drops. You're like, okay, you should be able to kill most of the early stuff.
Yeah.
I also think that one of the factors here is blue being generally pretty bad. And I think blue and green are the 2 worst colors. We'll get into color rankings in just a second here, but blue and green, I think, are the 2 worst colors, blue being the worst, to a degree where playing expensive cards in control decks, which are generally the strength of blue and somewhat the strength of green, is weaker, which leads more people to be playing a bunch of early plays. Because what do red and white tend to do very well? Well, it's play things on turn 2.
Right.
And black, of course, exists in like the middle of the spectrum where it's like good support for anything you need because you're playing black for like removal and like decent-ish creatures, but not really the stars of the show. So the color imbalance contributes to this. Just the fact that there's tons of good 2-drops contributes. And if you don't have, like, I really want like 4 or 5 2-drops in all my decks. And it doesn't have to be aggressive ones. And I count Shambling Gas, like good 1-drops count in this manner because there's something you can play. But you need something. You can't just do nothing and expect it to work out. Like, I'm not saying you have to mulligan if you don't have a 2-drop, but if you're on the play and don't have a 2-drop, you're usually fine as long as your 3s aren't terrible. On the draw without a 2-drop, if you don't have a good 3 and a good 4, like, you're kind of just setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah. I think it's important to clarify what we mean too, because I think that some of these terms get thrown around a lot and it's kind of like, have you ever stopped to consider what you're actually, what somebody's actually saying, right? Like, for example, when we say the format's fast, right? The kind of assumption that you would get you would think that every game plays out quickly, but that's not how it works, right? You can have a slow deck, meaning a deck that isn't planning on winning by turn 6 or 7. And you can be successful in the format, but if we say a format is fast, it means that there is a good chance that in the course of a normal draft, you will face multiple times where your opponent is curving out with creatures and putting pressure on you. And if you don't build your deck with that in mind, they will beat you. So that's the thing that you're really dealing with here is if the format is fast, you have to be fast either to race them or to stop them, right? And we talk about defensive speed, right? The ability to put down like a Shambling Gas is a defensive speed card. It's a card that you can drop and it'll trade off with their 1-drop, 2-drop, and some of their 3-drops in combat so that you don't die to that curve out and that you have the time to set up to actually do the things that you need to do. So keep that in mind.
The other thing is, even if you're not playing against aggro and you're not aggro, establishing yourself on the board gives you more room to do, you know, the things like activate dungeon map or Ranger's Hawk or to equip equipment or, you know, whatever it is you're doing or cast contact other plane. These cards all have much different contexts when you're getting attacked or versus you have the board stable or you're attacking.
Yes.
And then another thing which also, you know, kind of contributes here is pack tactics. Pack tactics gives you a significant advantage if you can get 6 power worth of creatures attacking. And that means that people, A, have incentive to play things on 2, and B, if you're not playing things on 2 to interact with those, they're going to get to pack tactics, and then it's going to be really tough because they've got a bunch of 3/1 first strikers or 3/3s, and you're like, wow, my 3-drop's not good enough to block your 2-drop. And that's when you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, I mean, you say that that's a simple statement that you just made, but it's really profound, right? If you just take one step back and you say, pack tactics, you know, is primarily red-green, but there's instances of it across other archetypes. It is an attack-only benefit. It has no effect on blocking. So those decks, any decks that play those cards or those colors or those specific cards that reward you for that are single-handedly going to be saying, I'm going to be attacking. That is what I'm doing. That is my whole plan is to attack, because fundamentally one of the mechanics that they introduced here only cares about attacking. So that's something that's really important to remember. You know, it'd be the same thing where if you get 9 toughness worth of creatures on the battlefield, you get some big bonus. That would have an opposite effect on the format where people were trying to draft slow, cheap, high toughness creatures or whatever it is to get these payoffs going. That's not the world that we're living in. And this is just one of the things that you'll see that makes the format faster.
Yeah.
I mean, it's built that way. Right. I like what you wrote here, by the way. You said you have to be assertive and have plays on curve or you'll fall behind. That's a really good summary for any format that we would define fast, right? You just have to have plays. You have to do things that are relevant to the board with your mana early. That's the key. If you can do that either attacking your opponent or setting up your defenses, then you'll be okay. What about the color rankings?
So the rankings, and I'm curious what your thoughts are, because this is just what I wrote down, is I've got red and black as tier 1, like the highest tier. Mm-hmm. And I like red a little more than black because I like all the red adjacent decks a little bit more than some of the black ones, but they're both excellent. And then there's white, which I think is good. No qualms with taking white early. Then there's green after a step below white, and then a step below green even is blue, where I'm not thrilled with most of the blue decks. I just don't feel like blue-black saboteurs. I just don't feel like you can't play cards like Thieves' Tools early in the game and expect the game to go well. You can't spend a bunch of energy setting up your evasive 2-power thing to get in and get you that extra benefit when your opponent's just attacking you with a bunch of 3/1s.
Or they're pack tacticsing you or whatever, yeah.
Right. And then white-blue, I think, is probably the blue archetype I generally like the most, because I feel like Venture is a mechanic that really rewards you the more you do it. Like the rewards continue to scale up the deeper you get into the dungeon, and then of course once you're getting rewarded for completing dungeons, that's even better. So I think white blue does a decent job of this. And then blue red is again, this goes back to an overall thing which I think is happening in the format, which is I think individual card power level is better than most of the synergy stuff that's going on in this format.
Yeah, I think, and a lot of the payoffs for red blue with the die rolling are synergy based, right? You need to have basically 3 things happen. You need a card that cares about die rolling. You need a card that is capable of die rolling, and then you need to actually do the thing that makes the card die roll. Like it might be on an attack. They might be able to stop you. You might have to resolve, a spell that doesn't affect the board. So you have to have that piece as well. And it can be difficult to pile those up. The real issue, though, is that when you do, there's precious few payoffs, right? The 2/2 that makes 1/1 flyers, great. That's where you want to be, and then everything else kind of stinks.
Yeah, like I one of the first decks I drafted was like, I have 2 barbarian classes and 3 brazen dwarfs and 3 pixies and 2 of the 2/2s that make tokens. Mm-hmm. All right, and then it's like, oh, the 2/2s that make tokens are great. The rest of this garbage. Yep. So not where you want to be. And then blue green, I think, is kind of a joke.
It's really bad. Yeah,
I think that the traditional like ramp theme is the weakest it's been in a while because of how aggressive everyone else is being. Like spending your turn 3 to cast the enchantment that ventures and makes your land tap for 1 more. Like, good luck doing that.
It sucks. That card sucks. Yeah.
And so I think that blue green is generally not the place you want to be. But I do think that the imbalance is actually a little bit wider than I think is preferable. But overall,
and you're speaking primarily about the blue being too
blue
low.
More than any other color.
Okay.
I put a pretty big negative on taking a blue card early, even if like sometimes you're going to do it and that's totally fine.
Yeah. So my rankings are a little different from yours. I have black number 1 and red number 2, but they're basically, it's the same as you said. They're in the same tier with each other. So that's just quibbling. But I have green 3rd and white 4th and then blue last in its own bottom tier.
Gotcha.
I do want to talk about green. I don't know when we should. There's an archetype that I've latched onto and had a lot of success with that I'd like to talk about that will kind of explain the green thing. But I don't know when the right time to do that is.
Well, let's
because we're still kind of in bigger picture stuff.
Let's just finish up our format notes and then we're going to talk about some individual decks. The equipment is actually pretty strong in this format. There's a lot of equipment, which it makes sense. It's super D&D themed, right? Thematic, picking up a dagger or a torch or, plate armor, whatever. But the good equipment, which is like plate armor, the dueling rapier is actually solid. Yeah. The Goblin Morningstar is excellent. Like
that one's
the
really
good equipment is good.
Where are you at on the mace?
I don't love mace +2.
Okay.
I think the mace is kind of weak. The boots of speed has been awesome for me, by the way.
Really?
Amazing. Like I think boots of speed is very good.
So what's the deal? It enables a pack tactics attack that comes out of nowhere, or what? Okay.
It just enables pack tactics. There's a decent amount of ways to like make tokens or extra material. There's payoffs for equipments themselves. So like all that added together. Like, look, I'm not saying put boots of speed in your red blue deck, but when I've been playing red white, it's been like a straight up like C+ level card. And when I'm even in black red, it's like a C where I'll just put it in my deck more often than not.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I haven't had any experience with or against it. Right? Boots on what?
The 3/3 ogre that attacks and gets you treasures. Like boot up that thing, and you're really talking.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. What else? What else do you like?
And then the build around uncommons tend to be pretty good.
Yeah.
I think you're generally going to happy with the gold ones. Obviously, the blue ones, as kind of we've mentioned, are not exactly where you want to be. But in general, I think the build around uncommons do actually do a good job of pointing you in the right direction. And then there's some mythic uncommons I did want to mention. And the funny thing is, I think all the best uncommons are Mardu. I think the best uncommons Battlecry Goblin. I think that card is just unbelievable. That's the 2/2 for 2.
Incredible.
Pack tactics, make a 1/1 attacking goblin. Okay. 1 red, your goblins get +1/+1 haste. So this thing has haste itself if you need to. You can pump pre-combat to make sure you hit pack tactics. And then if you're in a position of already doing it without pumping, you get an extra goblin that attacks as like a 2/3/1 or 2/1. I've consistently found Battlecry Goblin to overperform, and I think it is the best uncommon in the set.
It is my mythic uncommon right now for sure. Yeah, it's the type of card that's so good. You can look at a board and go, okay, should I attack? And you're like, oh, I guess I should. And then you're like, wait, oh, you're dead, right? And then you swing all your guys, and they're like at -7, and you're like, what? Yeah. Like it wasn't even close, right? Like you just start to recognize, because there's no cap on how many times you can activate it. That's the key. You get 6 mana, you get 3 activations of the thing. You don't need much else to make that work.
Yeah. It's just stacked so beautifully. Plate armor is another one I've been really impressed with. It turns out you just, especially in a deck that already is paying you off for playing other equipment, like you just end up in a spot where you can equip this for 2 or 1 or sometimes free, and it's such a big bonus where the power bonus forces your opponent to deal with this or die. The toughness bonus means it takes them extra resources, plus ward 1 is annoying. And then that buys you the time to re-equip on your next thing. Like you get them into the lock where they can't attack you because they're dealing with your plate armored goons. But every time they kill one, it means you get to spend your next turn re-equipping, and that works out. The red-black rare, or uncommon rather, Kalane the Painter.
Very good.
Another excellent card. Best. It's in the best color combination too, which obviously helps. And then Skullport Merchant, the 1/4 that makes a treasure, is just consistently great. Where
so good
by itself, it's a 2-for-1, and then it has the capability of being much more with threatens or with just random treasures lying around, all that stuff. And then Brunor, the red-white rare, the 5/3, leads to just the grossest starts. Like, I was playing at the pre-release actually, and me and Gabby were playing some test games, and she goes like, Brunor equip Boots of Speed attack you for 8 on turn 4. I'm like,
yeah, it's stupid. And it's uncommon, by the way. Like, that thing's an absolute beating. It's probably the scariest single creature. Like, when that thing hits, it's like, okay, you better gear up. Like, if you don't have an answer for it, you're usually dead in a turn or two.
Turn 2, 2-drop, turn 3, plate mail. You're already gearing up like, this is going to be bad. And then they're like, Brunor, equip plate mail for free on my 2-drop. And you're like, oh.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Never mind. Like, GG.
There's other good uncommons too. It's not an exhaustive list. But when I look at the what I consider like around the top 5 uncommons or so, they're all red, black, or white.
Yeah. And just to put a point on it too, Gretchen Twitchwillow, right? Blue-green 0/4 with 2 blue-green draw a card, and you can play an additional land. I mean, this is like my dream card, right? This is right. All I really want to do.
It's River Hoopu version 2.0.
Yeah. And trust me, I've tried to make the dang thing work, and it's a good example of a really excellent card that just can't keep up with the format. It is just to find a window to actually activate Gretchen Twitchwillow is almost impossible because you're just always under enough pressure. And then you do need to block with her, and she dies a lot,
I have good news, actually.
Oh.
If you won the game in your blue-green deck, it can draw you some extra cards.
Yeah, exactly.
But you have to win the game first.
It is how it feels, right? Because if you're activating it and you had other stuff that could actually affect the board, then you're losing. And if you activate it, it's because you already won, right? So it's like, I made it. I guess I have an 0/4, good enough. But you had to, second pick it or something. But anyway, that was just to kind of put a cap on that. I think we're on the same page with the archetype that we think is the best in the format, which has been black-red. Is that where you're at?
I mean, us and every other person who plays this format, right? Like,
well,
it's just so clearly the best.
Mm-hmm.
It's got the best removal. It's got great creatures. Like, you're not really conceding that much when it comes to creature quality. And then it even has the best threaten that there's been in a long time. Price of loyalty. First of all, threaten gets better the more aggressive the format is, because then you have times when just straight up casting it is good, which is not always the case, right? Sometimes, when threatens, when you don't have, I'm talking about when you do not have a sack outlet in your mid-range or control deck, threatens are pretty bad because you don't generally end up in a spot. But the best black-red decks are aggressive as well, on top of everything else. And they're casting threaten, especially a threaten that often gives +2/+0. It's easy to have a treasure lying around.
Yep.
It just gets them dead. You steal their 3/3, and it does 5 damage, plus now your other things are getting through because they're at 1 less creature.
Right. So, and that's your, we're not even talking about the dream scenario here. That's just like a thing that happens routinely in the format.
Yes. And, you're going to end up in a spot where your opponents are going to be playing in fear of this, but then when you draw the actual card, like the sack outlets, of which there's Deadly Dispute, there's Tiger Tribe Hunter, there's Skullport Merchant,
Sepulchral Ghoul.
Yeah, there's like 2 uncommon and 2 common sack outlets that you're happy to play always. Like these cards are just good. Stealing and sacking is just such a good recipe.
It's brutal.
When the pieces are there, which they are in this set, it's it tends to be one of the best decks, and that we've seen that in some other formats. We haven't for a while, which is why I think might take people by surprise a little bit. But yeah, it is good in this format. It is something you should strive for. And then black-red, of course, just has the best removal on top of that. So definitely black-red. You can draft it as an aggro deck, as a control deck, as a mid-range deck. I think it's best as an aggro deck because Price of Loyalty gets so much better when you're just naturally attacking. But you can really kind of pick your poison here. If you end up with 5 removal spells, just you can play it a little bit more controlling. But sometimes you end up with a bunch of Hobgoblin Captains, and you just do that thing too.
Yeah. What about the equipment deck? We talked about Bruenor as a highlight, but what about the more broad strokes on it?
Another good deck because it rewards you for something that I think is pretty good in this format, which is curving out. You're looking for a lot of 2-drops. And here's the thing. The equipment deck actually really even values 2-drops more than a normal aggro deck because it has the ways to buff all its stuff. So it cares more about getting things onto the board. In fact, the Goblin Javelinator, the 1-mana 1/1 haste that pings whatever it blocks for 1 damage, I have played that card more than half the time. And it's not like that card is amazing, but when you've got enough equipment, that card does exactly what you want.
Yeah, you need bodies. I mean, that's the name of the game. And then the question just becomes, which equipment do you end up getting? Because, the better stuff's at uncommon, generally speaking, and there's a few at common that are pretty bad if you don't have Bruenor, right? That Bruenor is like kind of the dividing line for that deck because you can get away with a lot more if you have a copy of that or God forbid 2 of them available, where if you don't, you have to be a little more responsible with your equipment. But yeah, consistent, fits the theme. It seems to be at home in the format. So that's a deck that I fear. Generally, my decks are leaning a little more mid-range. And so when people lead off with Mountain Plains, I'm like, right? Because you can just get ran over. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Speaking of running people over, so one of the archetypes I wanted to talk about, it's really interesting. It's green-red.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about this.
Yeah, so it actually splits into 2, which is there's often not room for 2 separate versions of a 2-color archetype, but there actually is here. So the baseline version, and I actually think it's quite strong as well, is Pack Tactics, right? You get to build out, similar to what we just talked about, a curve-out Pack Tactics deck. You get some combat tricks in there. You get the fight cards. There's an uncommon and a common bite. They both bite. They're both instant speed. They both even can pump power. One of them does by default, and one of them does if you spend treasure. And those cards are very good with Pack Tactics decks. As you might imagine, you're trying to get a bunch of power on the battlefield, so being able to snap off one of their creatures in green as a removal spell is quite strong. So you can build that. It works actually really well. It's a good deck, and it's one that I've drafted quite a bit. The guy that we passed in the Crack-a-Pack, the Null, whatever his name is, the 2/2 that gets the counters, right? That's kind of one of your bread and butter commons, and then you get the 3/1 for 1 and a red that gets first strike, the Goblin, whatever it's called, Captain or something.
Yeah, the Hobgoblin Captain.
Hobgoblin Captain, right? Like that guy, those are your 2 like sort of bread and butter common 2-drops that you can put together, and you don't need much else to get that going. And then of course you're playing red, right? So you get access to cards like improvised weaponry. You of course get Dragon's Fire, and then some of the uncommons. One of the uncommons we didn't mention that's really great is Magic Missile, right? That's one that's just a beating hulking bugbear out of red at uncommon. That's a 3/3 for 1 red with haste. I mean, that thing's just instant. Put the thing down and you've got Pack Tactics right away in most scenarios. So that's really scary. So you get to lean on the cards that everybody wants out of red and then take the more aggressive ones. And that's kind of your standard issue build. But me and my friend Jay have been experimenting with a different build because one of the edges that you can get is at any point during a draft, but particularly in the earlier stages where we're still kind of at, which is if you can find underdrafted commons that fit the format or that perform well. And, cards like Dragon's Fire never would categorize as that. So you have to take those early because you're only going to get a few chances to get them. But there is a mid to later range green-red deck that I've had a lot of success with. I think I've drafted it the last 4 times I've drafted it. I think I went 7 wins, 7 wins, 6 wins, 7 wins, right? Which is like, that's killing it, right? I mean, that is really, above expectation for, especially if I'm drafting the same type of archetype. And what it does is it leverages primarily the green cards that I feel are underdrafted. The red cards are just the good red cards, and you're not really getting ahead on that because people know what those are and they're fighting for them. But the cards that come to mind, right? Number 1, Gorgeous George. Hill Giant Herd Gorger, the 4GG 7/6 that when it ETBs you gain 3 life, is really good in this format. And there's a few reasons for that. 1, it's huge. It's bigger than anything else. 2, the 3 life actually matters a lot. That's something you really, really want. And 3, if you're playing red with this, you will have a treasure lying around at some point that lets you get the Herd Gorger down as it maps out, something like 1.5 to 1 3/4 turns early on average, right? That the land drop gap between when you hit your 5th land drop naturally and your 6th, is 1.5 turns or somewhere in that range. A treasure fills that gap, and that's kind of the sweet spot to hitting a 6-drop a turn early is kind of right where you want to be. And the Herd Gorger gains you life and stabilizes your board and is bigger than anything else going. So that's great. So that's one of the cards that you need to value higher if you want to draft this archetype. And then the real star of the show is Underdark Basilisk, which is the 1 and a green 1/2 Death Touch. And that's a card that's pretty easy to overlook. But the fact is that a lot of the aggressive decks in the format aren't based on evasion. They're based on power on the ground, right? Pack Tactics is a perfect example. It's rare that a flyer is part of the equation for Pack Tactics. It's mostly stuff on the ground. And Underdark Basilisk comes down early enough to trade off for basically anything in the format. They play the 2/2 that gets bigger. They play a 3/1. They play any of that stuff. It punishes equipment too, because they have to spend the mana and then you can block the equipped creature. And it's done a really good job. And then out of green, you get this really nice in-between filler stuff. So the best green common is Owlbear. So that's 3GG 4/4 trample. When it ETBs, you draw a card. Now, you get to absolutely lean on Owlbear, but it is a known quantity, so you won't get them as often. Then you also get Spoils of the Hunt, which is the 2 and a green. These are only commons, by the way. I'm basing this whole thing based on what commons can you get. You get Spoils of the Hunt, 2 and a green instant, bite a creature. If you spend a treasure, your creature gets +1/+. So until end of turn, that's a good removal spell if you have cards like Underdark Basilisk, Owlbear, and Gorgeous George in your deck, right? All of these cards work well with bite type cards. So you get that. And then you even play stuff like Inspiring Bard. 3 and a green, 3/3. When it ETBs, you gain 3 life, or you can pump up a creature. It just works perfectly as the mid-range filler that you need at common, because sometimes the 3 life is really important and can help stabilize you from a rocky start. And if you're ahead, the +2/+2 is relevant, especially if you have cards like Owlbear lying around. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of great uncommons and stuff that you can get in both of the colors to pump up the deck. If you open up a rare, any of that type of stuff comes in there as well. So, but to me, the core functionality of the deck is taking advantage of Underdark Basilisk and Gorgeous George as kind of the bookends for it, because they actually fit in a hostile environment like an aggressive format. And this means also that you don't need to waste picks or spots in your deck on what was the card, the 2 and a G tap, the land taps for GG, and you venture.
Yeah, find the path or whatever.
Yeah, you can't do that. Like that's too slow for this format. Your turn 3 can't be that. And have success. So you don't get to build a pure ramp deck in that way. You get to get incidental ramp off of the red cards that make treasures, like the card I mentioned, does 2 damage and you get a treasure. You can play the 2 and a red 2/2 that ETBs and make a treasure, blow up an artifact. And you can play the ogre that we talked about too, the 3 and the hill giant ogre that attacks and makes treasures based on what you roll, right? These are all cards that just spit out treasures, and you can one shot them to get your 6-drop onto the battlefield and be happy about it. So I'd encourage you to try it. I think that the key here is that the cards are underdrafted. If they weren't, then the archetype wouldn't perform as well, because you can just get them later, because you can prioritize. If you open up an Owlbear, you can take it, and then you can wield the Underdark Basilisk basically every time.
So the main question I'd have here, because when you first started talking about the deck, I knew for sure it was going to be a Hill Giant Herd Gorger deck, is what is red adding besides literally Dragon's Fire?
Right. So the main thing that it brings to the table is, because I have actually tried to combine this with other colors, but have found that red is the best. So Dragon's Fire, of course, is the number one thing that you get out of it. But you also get stuff that goes well with the random stuff that you put in, right? You get treasures. So I mentioned that. That's really important. Like, getting a Herd Gorger down a turn early is the difference between winning and losing in a lot of scenarios, because the life gain and the blocker is really, really important. So that's huge, and red is really good at spitting out random treasures from its commons and uncommons. So you get that. But then also, this is a classic mid-range deck, right? So like, there's a lot of the builds that you play where you have the 2/2 null that gets bigger on pack tactics, and you put that in your deck, and that's totally fine, right? And then, oh, hey, look, I opened up a magic missile. I opened up a hulking bugbear. These go perfectly with the build, particularly any of the cards that care about pack tactics, but that are taking away from I'm going to be like, I don't play combat tricks in this deck, for example, where in the other one I do. Right. So you are looking to affect the board with basically every play you make, but you're just shifting the goalposts from turn 2 and turn 3 to turn 4 and turn 5. And you're opening that up by taking these cheaper cards that block well. And then the expensive cards that, if you can get one on the battlefield, actually help you recover and stabilize the board. So that's kind of the difference for me. You could definitely combine it with other stuff. I just think red is the one that goes the best with it because of the treasure.
Yeah, I could see that. I could just see black also being good. Grim Bounty into Hill Giant Herd Gorger is not bad either.
Yeah, very good too. So anyway, these are the things that we look for, like pulling away from this specific archetype. This is what you should be doing to try to get ahead in a format is, what are the cards that actually fit the landscape here, but that people aren't taking very highly? And if you can identify those and give them a shot, then sometimes you can find that there's enough to build around here. And it's really interesting too, just because this format, I mean, it feels kind of like a core set, right? Like it feels like core set with a little bit of a bump on the complexity. Is that how you describe it?
Yeah, definitely.
And that means that a lot of times core sets, like if it's red green, it's like, that's the ramp deck, or that's the, hasty curve out big stuff deck or whatever. And I believe that there's actually room in this format for 2 different looks, right? Which is really cool. And that's also, I believe, true for red-black, right? Where you can build a really good red-black deck that doesn't care about sacrificing things at all. Or you can have that angle in there where you pick up enough of the threatens and a few sacrifice outlets, and all of a sudden you kind of turbocharge your deck in a little bit of a different direction. And that to me is really cool. I mean, I wouldn't expect that out of a set that's a little simpler like this.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that this deck illustrates is that, yes, the format's fast, but Hill Giant Herd Gorger, I mean, that's a hell of a card even against aggro, right? You gain some life that gives you that extra cushion, and finding out ways to be able to actually cast these cards can lead people kind of unprepared, especially if they, kind of rightfully are looking at playing a bunch of, cheaper creatures. And then you're like, all right, I'm going to play a 4/4 into a 7/6 game 3. I hope you're ready for that.
Right. Because, the curve out thing happens where you can fall behind. But if you play Inspiring Bard, gain 3 life, and a Herd Gorger a few turns later, gain 3 life, you've gained 6 life over the course of the turn. And you have a 3/3 and a 7/6 that your opponent, who's playing a lot of 1 and 2 drops, has to try to get through. That's hard to do. And then the Owlbears power you up in the late game, of course.
So another deck I wanted to talk about was the white-black Venture deck.
Which, where were you at? Because I was high on it early, and now I'm not as high on it.
Yeah, Venture has been getting a lot of people complaining about how underpowered it is. And it's I mean, I'll be honest, it's not the most powerful. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that the Venture stuff is, I wish the payoffs were a little bigger. That being said, Venture does a pretty good job of rewarding you the more you do it, where you start to get deeper into the dungeons and get bigger payoffs for it. And you get the cards that get, become twice as good once you completed a dungeon. Mm-hmm. And white-black has a pretty good amount of ways to do that. You get to really maximize Precipitous Drop. You've got, a bunch of different ways to delve in and out of the dungeon. You end up with, being able to really utilize all these delve cards in the way that kind of they were meant to be utilized. And then the combination of removal plus decent creatures lets you really take advantage of that. One thing that I think the most disappointing thing for me about the mechanic is, listen to these estimates and see if this tracks with what you have. Okay. 85% of the time you're supposed to go to Lost Mine of Phandelver.
Middle dungeon.
10% of the 10% of the time you go to the Tomb of Annihilation because they're at very low life. And then 5% of the time, mostly your opponent thinks they're going to complete Dungeon of the Mad Mage, so they go in there. I think one of the most one of the most unhappy things I had that I learned when I was doing this was when Andrew Cuneo, who drafts a ton, very good, was watching my stream, and I went into Dungeon of the Mad Mage, and he's like, you just shouldn't go into Dungeon of the Mad Mage. If you think you can complete that, you could just go into the Lost Mine twice, and it's better. And I was just like, ugh. And he's right, of course.
That's brutal. Like, is that true? Because if I have found that if I have repeatable dungeon things, I do go into the Mad Mage, and I mean there's a significant payoff for going in there. I mean,
so if you stack those two side by side, it is better to go to Dungeon of the Mad Mage than Lost Mine twice, just on strict output. But Lost Mine gives you so much of the value early in the dungeon, and then you also get to draw the card at the point where you're still halfway through a Mad Mage, that yes, in total, it is technically a little bit better to go through Mad Mage than Lost Mine twice. But the point where you get paid off, a card now is worth a lot more than a card in 4 turns.
Right.
You know,
and a lot of times you're dead. Yeah.
And you get the Scry right away in the Lost Mine, and you get the Goblin or the Treasure right on turn 2. Whereas if in Dungeon of the Mad Mage, you're 2 delves in, you've gained 1 life, then Scryed 1.
Right. And Mad Mage is 7 steps and Lost Mine is 4. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you do get through a little sooner on the mage, but because you need an extra step. So basically Cuneo was completely wrong and had no idea what he was talking about. But he brings up an interesting talking point.
Yeah. So I wish there was more variety in which dungeons you go into, and I understand, you know, that's hard to do. Like, it's a really complicated mechanic. But yeah, I mean, how many times have you seen Tomb of Annihilation completed?
I have never.
Okay, I have completed it once, and I think seen it completed once.
Yeah, because I just find that when people go into it, whether it's me or them, it's because they're pressing their advantage and the game ends. I mean,
right, and that is generally what happens. Yeah. So, you know, but white black's fine. You want a lot of ways to go into the dungeon, and you're kind of a mid range deck outside of that. And then another deck, the most high synergy deck that I wanted to discuss was the white green Lifegame deck. Just touch on that this is the deck that actually significantly pays you off for putting the right cards together, where your unicorns and your cleric class and Trellisara, the green red uncommon, are just amazing in the right green white deck, and of course not great if you're not getting all the pieces together. But this is the deck I've suffered some brutal losses to, because it's just really good. When they go, like, you know, turn 2 Trellisara, turn 3 Unicorn, turn 4 Druid class, play a land, trigger both my things, or even just Inspiring Bard in game 3, you're significantly under the gun. And like you touched on earlier, Lifegame itself is intrinsically good in this episode, or in this set. Yeah. So you'll end up where you feel like you're getting a good value off your Lifegame cards, even if you're not completely going off. The fact that against, like, your opponent's red-white deck, gaining 5 extra life is meaningful, means that the intrinsic theme is good.
Yeah. And it does feel a little unfair when your opponent does something so synergistic, when you're used to just cards more or less like standing on their own, or maybe being like a 1-2 punch with another card where their whole deck's kind of lining up. It's like, hey, wait a second. Like, you're getting counters all over the place. That's not fair.
Yeah.
How good do you think that deck is before we exit from it?
I think it's good. I mean, I think you need probably around 4 or 5 things that pay you for gaining life, and ideally 5 or 6 ways to gain life, which is like coming close to half your deck. But they put a lot of support. Like, when you get a Prosperous Innkeeper going, the 1/1 like Soul Warden guy, like, that thing is just awesome. It really does the trick.
That card's dope.
Druid and Cleric class both go from like unplayable or mediocre to just amazing in the right deck. So I am a big fan of the green white deck if you get the pieces together, which of course you won't always do. That's
right. Okay, well, let's call it a show there, Luis. If you at home have any what decks have been working for you, let us know. You can find us on social media, Marshall_LR and Luis's LSV. You can let us know what's working for you. What did you disagree with us? Did you agree with us? What did you think? And, the discussion, as always, continues. This show is brought to you by Channel Fireball. Make sure you check them out for really anything you need. If you need to pick up some new singles, for example, from the new set, you can head over to CFB and order them up. If you end up getting anything over there, just use the affiliate code LR at checkout, and it lets them know that we sent you, and we appreciate it. Thank you for that. What are we going to talk about next week? More of this, right? We're gonna be diving deeper
we've got
into the
plenty
dungeon.
to dig into in the Adventures of Forgotten Realms here. And we'll see how that ends up going.
Okay. Well, we'll see you next week.
So I know I talked about it recently, but I kind of want to reiterate. I've been completely hooked on Storybook Brawl, dude. Like, I don't know if you've
noticed.
I
know. I've been watching your stream. I'm like actually starting to figure it out a little bit.
Yeah. I feel like Marshall has you've got this second order effect where if I'm really into a game to the point that I stream it a ton, like you start to get into it as an observer. Among Us, like you watched more Among Us than I did.
Yeah, definitely. Like not even close. Such
an amazing game.
Yeah.
It's actually funny. I have not felt any desire to play Among Us since when I stopped playing it, but I still treasure how fun it was and how much it got me through quarantine. But yeah, I don't know. For some reason, I just have never really been.
Me too. I haven't watched it since. I don't know. You kind of vet things for me in a way, right? Because you and I have similar taste, and like if you find something really interesting, I feel confident I will as well. And if you say then I'm like, yeah, that's close enough for me. Because like our tastes don't align perfectly, but they're very, very similar. So I kind of know, there's a threshold there that I'm willing to cross. And yeah, that game's sweet. It looks cool.
Yeah, I've been jamming. I've been streaming it a ton. Like, basically I'll stream Magic, and then like the last hour, usually I'll play some brawls. And I got to watch a tournament last weekend. They had like a mini tournament with commentary by the guys who make the game.
Is it going to be a competitive game? Is that what this type of game is built for? I don't really understand.
Yeah, no, this game plays quite well competitively. Like, it's it's the sort of thing where. It is a little different than Magic in that there are 8-player lobbies, but like the tournament, for example, will give you a breakdown. So this is an auto battler. You play in a lobby with 8 people. They did 24 people. They ran 3 games, and you got point totals for how you finish, whether it was first through 8th. There's like the most points for first, the least through 8th, right? And then after 3 games where, 3 different lobbies where each time it was randomly seeded, the top 8 people in points played a final 4th lobby. And the winner of that lobby, whoever got first, it didn't matter what points you came in at. Whoever got first was the winner. The person who got second was second place, etc.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
So it works totally fine. And I've hit my ratings peak so far of around 4,500. I was like, I think
wow,
the highest.
You got to 4,500? You were like just under and then just above 4K for a while there.
Yeah,
you go on a run? What happened?
It's tough out there. Yeah, no, I had a good run because, a win will net you like, 45 points, but a loss gets you minus 80 or something. Yeah. So
Elo style stuff is so brutal in that way.
Well, I think Elo style stuff's the best because rewarding you for your win rate as opposed to your quantity of play, I think is a huge upside. But I just want to say, just try to check it out. Like I won't talk about it every week, but I honestly am really, really hooked. So I have been having a great time playing it, and I look forward to playing more of it. That's a Storybook Brawl. If you check it out on like Twitter, you just Storybook Brawl on Twitter or on Steam. Pretty easy to find, and I've been surprised by the reception I've gotten from people who watch my stream who are like, I love Magic, but this game's really fun to watch. I'm surprised by how much I'm enjoying this game, So
yeah.